Welcome back to our Simple Healthy Life podcast, where our goal is to have real, insightful conversations on topics that we find interesting. And today we're going to talk about passion.
Mhm.
It's a big word. It's a word that society has kind of thrown around quite a bit. Today, specifically, I want to talk about a couple aspects of passion. Number one, I want to talk about how to find your passion.
Mm.
Number two, I want to talk about what does passion look like in our society today.
Mhm.
I think you want to talk a little bit about harmonious passion.
Mhm.
And what was the other terminology used?
Obsessive passion.
Obsessive passion.
Mhm.
So I'll start with a stat that I think is super important and I was shocked by, but I guess really not shocked by.
Mm.
Did you know that recently they've studied this topic and only 20% of people say that they are actively engaged in a job that they feel passionate about?
Wow.
More interesting to me is that when asked the question if they're actively engaged in something that they're passionate about outside of work, there's still only 20% of people. So about 20% of people are actively engaged in a job that they feel passionate about
Mm.
and actively engaged in doing something that they're passionate about.
Right.
And the more interesting part for me is that that number is actually risen from the previous generation. So the previous generation, I think maybe never felt like they had the opportunity to find work that they were passionate about.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's believable, right? But it is shocking in the same sense. So, what I'm hearing is that basically 80% of people aren't engaging in their passion or something that they find to be passionate about very regularly. And I think that makes sense. I think that we are kind of consumed by, our daily stressors and life in general. And it's just hard to make time for the things that you love to do. It's interesting. The other day, I was actually thinking about my jujitsu journey, and I almost want to say that it was like it's hard. It was hard to get to do 8 years of jujitsu and blah 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 and come to class and show up and do all the training and do all the studying. I want to say that it's hard because that sounds cool, but that was the easiest part. Showing up and training and doing something that I love is very easy. But the hard part is finding the time, is making the sacrifices on an everyday basis, on the weekends, right? Like mornings, that's when I do a lot of training. And so just so happens that Saturday and Sunday mornings, I mean, that's a good time for other events, but I sacrifice a lot of that morning time for jujitsu. I've made the commitments there. And to me it's about finding the time. The time is the hardest part. It's very easy to do something that you love.
So I like that you say it's very easy to do something that you love, but I'd be willing to bet you that there's a lot of people out here, if I ask them the question, what are you passionate about? They're going to give you a coined response.
Mhm.
I'm passionate about helping other people. I'm passionate about what? Like what? I mean, you have jujitsu,
Mhm.
and from I think you have music.
Mhm.
Is there a third thing that you're passionate about?
Um, the work that I do, I find passion in that. The passion is also the word itself is very intimidating, and I think that when we're talking about those figures, like the 80% of people aren't engaging in something that they find passionate. I mean, what percent of those people have something that they would define they would define themselves as being passionate about, right? I would venture to say a good chunk of that 80% doesn't have an answer to that question. What are you passionate about?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. And through self reflection, just because I knew we were going to be doing this topic, I had to really sit down and think about what I'm passionate about. And thankfully, I came up with a few things, but it was my thought process around how I came up with it that I wanted to share today.
Sure.
Number one, I really didn't know. I had been injured for a little while, so that kind of held me back in my thought process. But I started to think, what are the things that I do that I don't worry about the clock, I don't worry about the time, that I'm in flow.
Mm.
This is one of them, which is pretty interesting to me,
Yeah.
right? That is something I can say. Having interesting conversations with people that I enjoy, that's something that I find passionate, or I find passion in.
Yeah, I agree.
Coaching,
Mhm.
this was the big one for me, and it was every time I would start a session with somebody or a group or a team, never looked at the clock. I'll constantly be running long or late, and someone tapping me, hey, practice is over. Like, my bad.
Mm.
Um, and then my own physical training on the good days. There's some days where you're just kind of trying to get through it or whatever. But on your good days, when you're physically training, or I'm physically training, those are the three things that I found off the top that I'm passionate about. And all three of those things I know I'm passionate about because I never really think about anything else while I'm doing it.
Mm. Yeah. I think too that you often find time for those things, right? Like you are part of the 20% who, you've kind of defined your passion, maybe just through action, through being, but you've also taken the time to cultivate that and to bring it to life essentially.
Yeah. So a second thing that I did recently, because I wanted to figure out what I was passionate about, and I'd like maybe for the audience to do this exercise, and don't be fearful of the answer, is ask some loved ones, what am I passionate about? What are the
Hmm.
things that you think I'm passionate about? I'd be willing to bet you that the answers are going to be not far off.
Hmm.
And people that know you well can tell when you're genuinely interested in something. And sometimes that feedback is all it takes to say, oh, you know what? I do appreciate that, or I am interested in that. And maybe that leads you to do that stuff more often. Right? I think that you're going to get a lot of coined answers, like I'm passionate about my family, or I'm passionate about my loved ones. Like, and that's okay. That's great. I'm glad, and I want that to be the case. But what do you, if the money was no object, if time was no issue, what would you do? Is there a problem that you would solve,
Right.
or do you like solving problems? Is that something that you could be passionate about, just solving problems?
Sure.
So I think that in order for us to find our passion, we really should spend a little bit of time in self-reflection.
I think you have to, right? And this is kind of how I see it. But passion is a little bit of an intimidating term for a lot of people because it feels so grandiose, right? Someone asks you, what is your passion? And then the first response is, ooh, I'm going to be judged on this, because for something to be a passion, you have to feel it to the depth of your being. Essentially, it has to be powerful to you. So then you ask someone, what are you passionate about? And they say, well, 1890s knitting. And you're like, okay, great. So there's a little bit of like acceptance that has to be done there. But I think that for the vast majority of people who don't find themselves to be passionate about something, they're intimidated by choosing. They're intimidated by making a decision and then acting upon that, or they're intimidating by pursuing something that could potentially be a vulnerable topic for them. One of the best things that I read recently on passion was that curiosity is a more gentle form of passion. It's more democratic, and that I really enjoy, because when you say, what are you passionate about, you get this big, so there's a big feeling, right? There's a lot of weight there. But if you say, what are you curious about, that's more of a gentle guide, right? And even from your example, you're saying, I'm curious about real insightful conversations on topics that you find interesting. You're curious about coaching, and you're curious about your grappling, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many things that you are curious about, but then the you pursuing those curiosities is what's cultivated the passion, that depth of being.
So might be the first time on this podcast that we get a little bit further out there than most.
Please.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So one of the things that I'm interested in and curious about is how to put this so that people don't just turn off the podcast instantly. I'm curious about people out there that claim to be channeling, right? Channeling's like an entity or channeling something else, some energy, something. And I have come across, because I'm curious about it, and we have all of the opportunities now to look up this stuff. I've come across this person named Daryl Ankar. Are you familiar with this person?
No.
Okay, this guy Daryl Ankar, he's claiming, and I'll just say it the way everybody says it. He's claiming to be channeling an entity called Bashar.
Mm.
Anyways, Bashar teaches us about passion. It's an interesting how this came about, and what he claims is, or what he says is, the way to live a genuine, happy life is to follow your passion without expectation of the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So just follow your passion without fail. Whatever feels like the best thing for you, do that. And he claims that what that does is it essentially aligns the universe around who you are, yourself, and your higher self, and brings to you the synchronicities that we've all felt. And when you're in that passion state, when you're doing and you're acting upon your passion, you're truly being your best self, whether it's your higher self or your best self. And that is, according to this person, that is according to him channeling another person, that is essentially how to live your best life.
Mm.
And to hear and to read that only 20% of people even engage in that actively, I wonder if we just never really gave it a try, right? Through fear, right? Fear that we're prioritizing the wrong things, through fear that we're prioritizing things that aren't going to make us money, and we're going to have some outcome that we're not going to want because we spent too much time doing things we're passionate about. And I think to take it one step further, when we started by saying that the generation before us really didn't have the opportunity to, or really look at that way,
Right.
maybe it's even the generation before that. So if we're talking now, we're getting into almost like the early 1900s, right? When we went through the Depression and we went through all of these things where people literally were working to live, right? Farming to live. Unless you were passionate about farming, you had to grow your own food. So you were doing that. You weren't just doing something you were passionate about. So I know I said a lot there in a row, but there's some interesting things for me.
Yeah, certainly. I like that last point. You know, where pursuing your passion is a luxury that we have right now, where we didn't have back then, and so we are very lucky that we can, one, have all the information in the world to begin to pursue a passion, but we do have the time. We just choose not to prioritize it, right? But I would agree. I think there is something very special about someone who's passionate. Even in the example, the 1980s, knitting of quilts, right? If you find someone and they're really into that and very passionate about that, I mean, there's a certain energy to them, right? There's something very compelling about someone who's deeply passionate about something, no matter what it is.
Oh, absolutely. And I have a great example in my own life. I'm lucky enough to live relatively close to what is now my favorite restaurant. And the bartender there, it's called the Charred Oak Tavern. It's in Middleborough, in case anybody wants to go. It's,
Oh, yeah,
it's
yeah.
really well done.
Mhm.
There's one bartender there that specifically is passionate about whiskey.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, can rattle off the numbers, the dates, the whys, the hows.
Yep.
And when we go in, I mean, I like whiskey and I think it's fun, and I go there intentionally with the intention of having him make me a Manhattan because he makes all the different crazy combinations. But the energy around it is different. You've been to a million bars and restaurants, and you order a drink, and they bring it over, and they say whatever they say. This guy is really passionate about whiskey, the making of it, the shipping of it, the history of it, and it shows. It's really become. He's the reason that it's my favorite restaurant.
Interesting. Yeah. It it's just there. The passion comes through. It's not this person isn't talking about, oh, I'm passionate about whiskey, and then trying to like bring other people into that belief,
Yeah,
right? The passion just comes through very naturally, which is so interesting. But that's the energy, right? Like that's the energy that's so, so cool. You can't fake passion. I could say I'm super passionate about tennis, but it's not true, and everyone knows that because I don't engage with tennis, I don't play tennis, I don't care about tennis, right? And so, there's something about passion as well that it's not just a choice, but it's active prioritization to pursue something you're curious about over a period of time. So I could say, I'm passionate about tennis and do that for 3 days, play a bunch of tennis for 3 days, but everyone can do that. Everyone who has access to anything in the world can play tennis for 3 days. If I did it for 3 months, okay, now we're weeding a little bit more passion out of the woodwork, so to speak. If I do it for 3 years, okay, now we're getting closer, and I'm probably starting to build an allure and living out the passion. And imagine if I did it now for 10 years or 30 years. Very few people can keep those kinds of things up for that amount of time. And so, when you talk about this individual who really is passionate about whiskey, it's just they've probably been doing it for so long. They've probably been engaged in whiskey for so long that it just is, right? That's just the part of their identity, so to speak.
absolutely. And I love what you said there, right? It's really difficult to fake passion. And it's not doing anybody any favors to fake passion.
Right.
And when we had Jair on, we talked about his culture that he's built in his gym.
Mm.
I mean, you can tell that not only is he passionate about jujitsu, but he's passionate about sharing his knowledge with others.
Right.
And I think when you are engaged in that passion of yours, you end up interacting with more people that are passionate about the things that you're passionate about. And I say this to people, if you're looking for a community or you're trying to meet new people, right? Go do the things that you're passionate about.
Mhm.
At least you're going to start by interacting with people that might be interested in the same stuff. Like if you love yoga, go take yoga classes, go to a bunch, go around, find different ones that you like, because the people in there are eventually going to be the people that you're surrounding yourself with. They're going to be interested in yoga.
Mm.
And I think that's important for people to recognize that there are lots of different ways to discover your passion, but acting on your passion it's not easy for anybody until you get started.
Right.
Then you build a little momentum, start acting on it, start building it into your schedule. Before you know it, you're doing the things that you're passionate about consistently.
Mhm.
And and I agree with Bashar and Daryl, and
Yeah.
I think that is the way to live a happy, healthy life.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, even using the example of us having these conversations, either with each other or other people, right? It's something that we both found curiosity in and enjoyed, and then we made time for it. We do it consistently. We block out time, and we just do our thing, right? There is no expectation of outcome there. We just do our thing, and we've had some amazing conversations with people that, you know, if the only outcome were that we learn something, that's perfect.
We win.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree completely.
Yeah.
So what would you say would be a way that people could find their passion? What would you like? We talked about prioritizing time, but like finding it. Like you sit down with somebody like, what are you passionate about? And they give you that response, like you said,
Mm.
and then you change it. What are you curious about? And they're still not sure because they've been so ingrained in this way of life. How would they do it? Give me something.
Mm. Yeah. So one way that someone can identify their passion is starting with curiosity, right? So is there anything that you're even remotely curious about? It could be the most obscure thing on the planet. I talk with someone who likes collecting uranium glass. I didn't even know that was a thing. But apparently some glass is has more uranium than others. I'm not. I don't even really know. More radiation. Who knows? But this person kind of passionate about it, and it starts with a curiosity. What is that? That sounds kind of interesting. Let me give that a shot. And so there's this idea called passion sampling, curiosity sampling, where you find a curiosity, cooking, knitting, collecting glass, and you go and take a class and you just see what it feels like, right? So the same thing could be said for jujitsu or rock climbing or whatever it might be. Go and try it out and see how it jives. And if it's not something completely averse to you, then maybe that's something that you have to put some time in to truly evaluate. And Josh Kaufman, who's written a lot of books on learning, he has this 20-hour rule. And what he says is that you should really practice a skill for 20 hours before you have a true assessment of whether it's for you or not. And so you can be somewhat mildly curious about something, but then throw in 20 hours into it, because it takes 20 hours for you to then see improvement and to see some skill development there, which is one of the fundamental building blocks of passion. There's a recipe to passion, which is very interesting. And it's comprised of three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so autonomy being you're making this choice on your own. No one's forcing you to go to a uranium glass collecting class, right? This is just not a thing. But you choose that yourself, and you bring yourself into this passion. No one's forcing you to go to jujitsu or rock climbing. You're choosing that. So that's the autonomy part. The mastery part would be incorporating the idea of that 20-hour rule. So you go do this thing, rock climbing, jiu-jitsu, basketball, whatever, and you put in enough time to get better at it so you can see what the progression is like. And then the third part is purpose. So what is the meaning behind it? There should be some underlying meaning, even if that meaning simply is, I'm curious about it, or I get this feeling when I do it and I'm not entirely sure why I like that. Right? You climb the top of a rock wall and you recognize that every single moment at the top of the wall, you're completely engrossed. You're not thinking about your job, your relationship woes or finances. All you're thinking about is, I got to hang on for my life, because if I don't pay attention, I'm going to fall. And so those three things go into passion. And it's interesting because it's cultivated, it's grown. Again, it's not a choice.
So I couldn't help but think two things. One, imagine where the world would be if you spent the 20 hours learning to meditate. If you actually was like, put your timer on and was like, I know I can only do this in 5-minute sections. That's 5 times 20 is 1 hour. That's 400 sessions of meditating.
Yeah.
Imagine where that would be.
Right.
The second, and sorry, off topic, but not off topic really. And the second is, I think you kind of stumbled on or shared what might keep a lot of people from finding their passion. And I think it's the last one. I think it's the purpose.
Right.
Because we live in a society where intentional curiosity doesn't line up with purpose, right? Our purpose is to be a great mom or dad. Our purpose is to be a great XYZ at our job, right? Not our purpose is to be great at jujitsu, or our purpose is to spend time doing the things we love. We just are taught that. And I think it goes back to that generational aspect, right? Hey, you can love music, but you got to weed the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have time before bed, then you can sing or play your music or whatever, whatever you got to do. And I think as we progress through time and life gets essentially easier, we have more time to find that purpose and passion. And let's not be afraid of it. Let's say, okay, if this is where we're at and we have the opportunity, let's go after it. Let's find one or two things that we can be intentional about.
Right. Yeah. Too many people prioritize the finances in the purpose. In the ingredient list under purpose, people think, well, that's not going to make me money, so what would I even bother? But perhaps the greatest thing that you can do is pursue a passion, outside of finances. Pursue a passion just because you like to do it. There doesn't need to be an outcome. It's entirely plausible that you practice your rock climbing for 10,000 hours and you make a career out of it. It's entirely plausible. Is it something that you should focus on? No, absolutely not. You should not do that. But it's that monetary, the necessity for that and the underlying purpose actually makes a lot of the things that we do more aligned to the obsessive passions rather than like a harmonious passions. And so that's kind of what we had brought up earlier, that there are two different types. And the obsessive passion would be one driven by external forces. So the need for money, the need for self-validation, or because your parents made you do it or your friends do it, so you figured, I want to fit in. And so, the example that I often think about with obsessive passion might be, the starving musician or something, where they might be deeply passionate about music, but maybe it's overridden by the fear of failure, right? Their career is kind of riding on this fine line. Maybe they feel the need to constantly practice because if not, then who's going to book them for gigs, right? Maybe their entire identity is wrapped up in being a musician, and so there's almost like a lot on the line, and sure that it could ride a fine line between harmonious and obsessive, but the true distinguishing characteristics of obsession and obsessive passion is that it's not really good for your mental and physical well-being, and so other things are becoming neglected, such as that example. Whereas a harmonious passion is more seamlessly integrated, and it's something that you do just because you want to do it. You have that kind of autonomy, right? The I want to do this. I want to do jujitsu. There's no other meaning other than I just want to because I like it, right? That's enough. And so harmonious passions, they find actually people who have these do better. They live better lives, and because they have these things that they just do just because they like to do it, right? And there probably is some bigger purpose there, but it's not necessarily finance related.
So if we're talking about harmonious passion, which is what we're essentially talking about,
Sure.
and you were to go and interview people that are essentially living their passion, right? I don't want to give you just a coined example of, I'll give you Jair,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Jair is living his passion. And is Jair making money by competing in jiu-jitsu every weekend? No.
Mm-hmm.
But because he's continuously gone down this path where he's living his passion, he's financially making enough money to support his family, I imagine. So he's got a great school and a lot of people, so I'm assuming so. But that's just one example, right? So I think it kind of wraps everything up the way that we just discussed it. When he went to go do that and live his passion, yeah, there was certain aspects that he had to learn about, figure out. It wasn't that he wanted to be a gym owner. He wanted to do jiu-jitsu and bring jiu-jitsu to the community. And then certain synchronicities came about, right?
Right.
Started to meet people that were in the area. And then all of a sudden, one thing led to the next, led to the next. And I bet for all of our listeners, there's somebody out there in their life that is living their passion right now. 2 out of every 10. So talk to them and ask them a little bit about, hey, what happened? You seem to be living your passion. You seem to be passionate about the work you do. You seem to be passionate about all these interactions. How did you go from just being passionate about it to making it financially viable for you? So because we're sitting here talking, I'm going to ask you the question. You are passionate about helping people with their diet, with their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You followed that passion,
Mm-hmm.
and now you are essentially living that passion to a point that's making it financially capable for you.
Right.
What types of things happen? Synchronicities happen. How did that go? Just give me a little bit of your journey of following your passion.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been in health and fitness for 16, 17 years, right? And so it started before I became a dietitian, obviously, because I needed to decide to go to school and become a dietitian. So these were things that I studied and I practiced and I implemented, and I started from, the reason why I likely strayed into that was for a greater purpose because my health was really poor when I was a kid, and I grew up in a household that health wasn't a discussion, right? I didn't really go and get, your annual physicals. People didn't play sports. There wasn't conversation on what healthful eating looks like. There wasn't, conversation on what mental well-being looks like. There was none of that. And so it was up to me to kind of make that decision to say, well, I can do this. And I've had, even when I first started, I had plenty of thoughts. I mean, I'm 14 at the time, and I'm thinking, it's too late. And I laugh now, but at the time it was very real, right? I was too far gone at the time. But then I had thoughts such as, well, that may not necessarily be true. I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to take the path. And so, in a lot of ways, it wasn't exactly as profound as that. Although I did have profound moments to say, well, let me really tackle this and let me do what I can. One of the first things that I got into for health, I had no idea what I was doing, and the arrow was kind of funny, but I just turned on demand and put on an aerobics class, and I would just do aerobics. I didn't know, I saw like mom doing aerobics when I was 10 or something, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I guess this is what it's all about. So I put that on, and then I would, make little things like, okay, every time I get up and, get off the couch, I'll do 10 push-ups or whatever. And I remember starting and I couldn't even do one, right? So it started with just a little bit of action, a little bit of purpose, a little bit of autonomy. No one said, hey, you need to do this. I just decided, and then made the decision to pursue that with school. And I did a lot of things before where I am now, owning the practice, that I didn't really like to do. It was just part of the process, right? I took jobs that were, where I worked a lot, and I built plenty of skills, and I took those jobs prioritizing the skill and learning over everything, right? And then eventually getting to the place where, I have the skills, I have the ability to help people, and then open up the practice and took the leap. But I think, it starts with action. It starts with the doing in the face of the unknown. And the same thing is true for Jair, Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt who owns this very successful school, BTT Taunton. He was training jiu-jitsu for 25 years before he opened a school. 25 years of commitment of doing the thing that he loves before it actually manifested into monetary gain, which is amazing. That's such a long time to be committed. And that goes back to anyone can do it for 3 days. Very few people can do it for 3 years, and almost no one can do it for 30 years. And so what sets him apart is the fact that he was part of the almost no one, right?
Yeah. Well, everything you just said tells me that both you and him were never concerned about the outcome. You just followed your passion. You followed what you were curious about. You took action, and you just kept going. And I think that's commendable for one. I think it sets you apart for two. And now that you're using that passion, both of you in this scenario are using that passion to help other people, it's noticeable, right? That's likely to be the reason that your practice is thriving. I mean, you're a very knowledgeable guy, but you're not doctor,
No, I'm not.
right? I mean, and even if you were, it wouldn't have the same effect, right? If you're a doctor this or doctor that, but you're not passionate about it, people can tell that. We talked about that already, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can tell that you're passionate about helping other people, sharing your story, from where you came from to where you are now. And I think that is exactly what we're talking about here today. I think that's one of the lessons that people can take away. And while I was expecting to have a cool conversation about purpose, I didn't expect to really understand you as well as and where that came from. So thank you for that today.
course, of course.
I think all of our listeners should spend a little time today thinking about their passions,
Mm-hmm.
or at the very least, to your point, their curiosities,
Yeah.
and spend it not worried about the outcome. Don't say, oh man, uranium glass isn't cool enough to be a passion.
Right.
Don't say, just what is it? Maybe even take a step back and go back to your 5-year-old self. What was cool then? I like riding my bike. Do I like riding my bike now? Those type of things.
Yeah, well said, well said. And yeah, I totally agree. I think everyone should start there, the curiosity, and to your own point, like forgetting the outcomes. The outcomes aren't important. You're doing the thing because you like to do it, and that's reason enough to do it. Right? You don't need this huge reason beyond that. Sure, there could be, this deep ingrained belief that you want to help people and everything, and that will come through very naturally. But just start with the curiosity, start with what you like doing, and remembering that the hardest part about it is making the time, right? And maybe a question for you is, you have obviously the passions around breath work and meditation and teaching people these things. What brings you there?
What brings me where?
What brings you into that field of meditation and breathing, and why do you want to teach people more about this?
Well, I guess I don't know if I've ever told this story on the podcast, but I came to meditation and breath work and yoga through necessity.
Mm.
I had been into fitness for a long time, and I ran across in my career path someone that was my boss, direct report, and he made no bones about the fact that he really did not like me.
Mm.
And I had never dealt with that before. I never dealt with anybody that was that I had to interact with all the time. That was like, we don't get along, and I'm a pretty easygoing guy. And I remember being on vacation in Hawaii, and he called me to tell me that he was planning on firing 3 members of my team. And his reason was because.
Jesus.
Yeah. And I'm not exaggerating or elaborating. It was actually, it was a very difficult time for me.
Wow.
And I couldn't get my parasympathetic nervous system to play. I was in fight or flight on vacation, 6 hours back in time, 3,000 miles away, and I couldn't do anything to help myself. So I opened up YouTube and I started searching, how can I help my own mental state? And I started to research meditation, started to do it, didn't help, couldn't do it, too angry, too much upset. Started to research breath work, started to look into the body, started to slowly learn how and why and what. And over the course of about, oh, by the way, when I got home from Hawaii, that Monday I quit.
Yeah, nice.
Yep. Which was a big moment for me.
Yeah.
And I started the quitting was a big moment, but it didn't help with the anger.
Oh, I'm sure.
And it didn't help at all. It actually felt more like something was taken from me than quitting, which made it worse in my own head. So I started to go through this process of sticking with it, doing my morning meditation, doing my morning breath work. My wife was incredible the whole time, really supporting me. She was the person that I lashed out at the most, of course. And then started moving that direction. And eventually I realized that it's real. The benefits, the way that your body responds to your intentional breathing, the way your body responds to your intentional meditation is real.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the more proud moments I had was a few years later. I couldn't remember that person's name. And I was proud of that because it had lived in my head rent free for so long that once I realized that this was real and not something that I had made up, I wanted to start to share that with people. And then I took it one step further because I my love of athleticism and athletics and my research, and I got my certifications and all this different things, and studied and became genuinely curious about it. It became a passion of mine, and then sharing it is just as sharing it for me now is even more impactful for me, and seeing somebody else learn what I had to learn the hard way, helping them learn the easier way, is what really makes me, it brings me joy, lights me up.
Wow, that's amazing. I kind of like the it was a simple quote there, but you said, it became a passion, right? Again, emphasizing the fact that it wasn't really a choice, although you chose to get into it, you didn't choose for it to become a passion, right? It just
Yeah.
became such.
Yeah, and it probably was, it probably did take the 20 hours or more at 5 minutes a day. It definitely was autonomy. There was definitely, I definitely needed to master it, and which I'm never going to, and we probably never will. But now it has given me purpose. And now I'm actually thinking about it. Now it is financially benefiting me.
Exactly.
And that was never my intention. It was never I was never worried about the outcome, or at least I was worried about the outcome, but it wasn't that.
Right.
I was thinking this outcome would help me feel better.
Right.
And it has in so many ways. And really didn't think about it until this question came up. So thank you for that.
Amazing. Yeah. No, such great stories. I mean, good real examples of why you should just engage with things that you enjoy, because you never know what comes of it. Nothing might come of it. Nothing financially might come of it, but something much bigger might come of that. But it's not your job to know. It's not your job to know whether the outcomes are this or that. In fact, it could be an infinite amount of outcomes, and you probably think of two, right? Like, I could either make a bunch of money from this, or I could, not, right? So, but there's so many other outcomes, right?
Yeah.
There's so many infinite amount. So, don't focus on that, but just focus on finding curiosity, engaging with that, making time for that, and giving yourself the allowance to practice this new thing, or maybe an old thing, for at least 20 hours before you make the decision, well, this isn't for me.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll just try to sum it up. Engage in something you're excited about or curious about without concern about the outcome, and be open to all the surprises that come along the way.
Well said. Right.
Well, thanks, man. This was a good one.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah.
So you can find us on Spotify and most other podcast platforms. Our handles will be down below, and thanks for watching.